Sarah had finally escaped Mark's suffocating grip, but as she tucked her 7-year-old daughter Lily into bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real nightmare was just beginning. Mark wasn't the man she once loved anymore. He had become something darker, something far more dangerous. And as the shadows outside their apartment grew longer, Sarah knew that no matter how far she ran, Mark's obsession would follow. Sarah had always believed in second chances. After years of a tumultuous relationship with Mark, her ex-boyfriend, she had finally reached a breaking point. Their relationship had been a whirlwind of passion, love, and jealousy, but it was also filled with arguments, distrust, and manipulation. Mark's controlling nature had slowly suffocated her, and after one too many emotional breakdowns and heated fights, Sarah had made the painful decision to leave him. It wasn't easy, especially considering their history and the love they once shared. But Sarah knew it was the right choice. She couldn't stay in a relationship where her happiness was sacrificed at every turn. After the breakup, Sarah did everything she could to rebuild her life. She found a new apartment in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Sarah loved how the small space felt cozy and safe, a welcome contrast to the tension that had filled their old home. She and her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, quickly settled into their new routine. Lily was resilient and had adapted surprisingly well to the change. School was going well, and though she missed having both parents together, she seemed to take comfort in the stability of their new life. Sarah had also found a steady job at a local coffee shop, working shifts during the day while Lily was at school. The work wasn't glamorous, but it gave Sarah the flexibility to be there for her daughter. She found peace in the simple act of making lattes and helping customers, and for the first time in years, she felt like she had control over her life. But despite her attempts to move on, Mark refused to let go. At first, it started with text, messages. He would send long, rambling notes filled with apologies and promises to change, but they quickly escalated. Some days, he would leave angry voicemails telling Sarah that she would regret leaving him. Other times, he would show up unexpectedly at her workplace, waiting for her outside, just standing there with a vacant expression. It wasn't the kind of presence that felt like someone wanting to reconnect. It was the kind of presence that felt dangerous. Mark's eyes always seemed empty, almost as if he was searching for something more than just answers. Sarah had tried to be firm with him, asking him to respect her boundaries, but Mark didn't listen. She began to feel a gnawing unease every time she walked out of her apartment, wondering if he might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to slip up. It wasn't just the phone calls or the surprise visits, it was the unsettling feeling that Mark was always watching, always waiting. There were moments when she'd turn around and catch him standing across the street, watching her from a distance, his face expressionless. One afternoon, as Sarah was walking Lily home from school, she noticed Mark's car parked a few blocks away. Her heart skipped a beat, but she tried to stay calm, telling herself it was just a coincidence. Yet as they walked past, she couldn't help but feel his eyes on her back. She quickened her pace, pulling Lily closer to her side, and for the first time she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Mark had always been a volatile person, prone to outbursts of anger and frustration. Sarah knew he was capable of unpredictable behavior, but she never imagined it would escalate to something like this. She thought he would eventually move on, that he would find someone else and let her go. But with each passing day, Mark's obsession seemed to grow stronger. It was as though he couldn't stand the idea of Sarah living a life without him, and the more she tried to distance herself, the more desperate he became. Despite the warning signs, Sarah tried to convince herself that Mark wouldn't cross the line. He was, after all, the man she had once loved, the man she had shared so much of her life with. But deep down, she knew she was only fooling herself. Mark was no longer the person she had once known. The man she had once loved had been replaced by someone darker, someone who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Sarah just didn't know yet how far he was willing to go. It was a bright Saturday afternoon, and the weather had finally turned warm, making it the perfect day for a trip to the park. Sarah and Lily had been through a lot in the past few months, and today they both needed a break from the pressures of their new life. Lily had been excited all week about their planned outing, eager to spend the afternoon playing on the swings and running around with other kids. Sarah, though more reserved, was looking forward to seeing her daughter's joy. The park was one of those places where the weight of the world seemed to lift, even if only for a few hours. They arrived just after lunch, and Sarah let Lily lead the way, watching as her daughter ran off toward the playground with a wide grin on her face. The park was buzzing with activity, parents chatting on benches, kids laughing and racing around. The air smelled fresh, and the sound of birds chirping provided a gentle soundtrack to the afternoon. Sarah settled onto a nearby bench, watching her daughter's carefree energy as she climbed the jungle gym and swung higher and higher, squealing in delight. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to relax, to forget the constant anxiety that had been gnawing at her since the breakup. Lily seemed so happy, so at ease. It was a rare feeling these days, one that Sarah didn't want to lose. She knew that the turmoil in her personal life had been hard on her daughter, even if Lily didn't fully understand it. Sarah's hope for the day was simple. Let it be a moment of peace, a reminder that happiness still existed. They spent hours at the park, eating ice cream, playing catch, and enjoying each other's company. Sarah felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine that everything might be okay. Maybe the worst was behind them. Maybe the worst was just Mark's distant presence, shadow that would eventually fade. But as the sun began to set and the park started to quiet down, Sarah felt a familiar prickle at the back of her neck. She couldn't place it at first, just a sense of being watched. She scanned the area, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then, in the distance, across the park's entrance, she saw a figure standing near a tree. He wasn't facing her, but she recognized him instantly, Mark. His posture was stiff, almost mechanical. He wasn't looking at her directly, but Sarah felt the unmistakable heaviness of his gaze. He was watching. Panic surged through her, but she tried to remain composed. It was far enough away that Mark couldn't hear or see her, but the feeling of being hunted was unmistakable. Sarah turned away quickly, trying to shield Lily from seeing anything that might make her feel unsafe. Her heart raced, and a sickening knot twisted in her stomach. She had been hoping that today would be a day of normalcy, of forgetting, but that hope seemed foolish now. Mark was always there, always lurking in the background, even when she thought she could breathe for a moment. Lily was oblivious, laughing as she raced toward the swings again. But Sarah couldn't ignore the dread building inside her. Mark was here, and his presence felt like a warning. The thought of leaving the park immediately crossed her mind, but she didn't want to cause a scene or make Lily feel anxious. She knew that she needed to keep calm, but every fiber of her being was screaming to get out, to run. But if she did that, Mark would have won. He would have successfully made her fear him again, and Sarah refused to let him do that. As they made their way toward the park exit, Sarah found herself glancing over her shoulder more often than she liked, always searching for Mark. She didn't see him anywhere, but the feeling of his eyes on her remained. She hoped that maybe he had simply been passing through, that it wasn't anything to worry about, but deep down she knew the truth. Mark had never really let go of her, and the fact that he was still haunting her thoughts, even on a bright, carefree day, meant that Sarah couldn't escape his grip. Not yet. The day after the unsettling incident, at the park, Sarah tried to go about her routine as normally as possible. The anxiety still lingered, gnawing at her from the inside, but she did her best to shield Lily from it. They spent the day at home, reading books, baking cookies, and watching movies in the living room. Sarah wanted to make sure Lily felt safe, wanted to create some normalcy for her, even if the world around them felt increasingly unpredictable. By the time evening arrived, Sarah's nerves had settled enough that she agreed to meet Mark. She had hoped that it might give her the closure she needed to move on, that this final conversation might allow her to sever whatever tenuous connection still existed between them. Mark had texted her several times since their brief encounter at the park, apologizing for his behavior and asking for a chance to talk face to face. At first, Sarah had been resolute in her refusal, but something about his messages made her second-guess herself. Maybe he was sincere. Maybe he had genuinely changed, as he claimed. After all, he had been part of her life for years, and part of her still clung to the hope that he could be the man she once thought he was. She told herself that this meeting was just for closure. Nothing more. She would listen to what he had to say, and then, once and for all, she would put the past behind her. Sarah chose a neutral, public place for their meeting, a diner on the outskirts of town that was quiet but still busy enough to feel safe. She arrived a few minutes early, her stomach tight with nerves. The diner was mostly empty, the soft hum of a jukebox playing in the background. She sat at a booth near the window, hoping that Mark would arrive on time, that the conversation would be brief and uneventful. When he walked through the door, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Mark had always had a way of walking into a room and demanding attention, his tall frame and intense eyes making people notice him. But tonight his face was different. There was something cold about his expression. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and there was a tightness in his jaw that Sarah hadn't seen before. He sat down across from her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt thick and uncomfortable. Sarah tried to steady her breath, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Finally, Mark broke the silence, his voice calm, but with an underlying edge to it. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I know I messed up, but I want to fix things, Sarah. I want to make it right." There was something in his words, something that sounded almost convincing. Sarah felt a flicker of doubt in her mind. Maybe this was the moment when Mark would admit his faults, take responsibility, and give her the peace she had been craving. She didn't want to believe that Mark could be so dangerous. She didn't want to admit that her instincts had been right all along. As he continued speaking, Sarah felt her guard drop slightly. He spoke about his regret, his realization that he had lost everything because of his mistakes. He seemed sincere, almost desperate. He even mentioned going to therapy, telling her that he was changing, that he was ready to let go of the past. But then, without warning, Mark reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sarah froze. Her eyes locked onto the box, and a chill ran down her spine. It was the kind of gesture Mark had done in the past, an attempt to win her back, to sway her emotions with a gift. But something about it felt wrong. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Mark opened the box slowly, revealing a necklace inside. The pendant was shaped like a heart, delicate and intricate, but Sarah's eyes went straight to the back of the pendant. There, engraved in small, delicate letters, was a message that sent a wave of unease washing over her. "This is your final chance." Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the message, the words burning into her mind. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a sign of love or reconciliation. It was a threat, a warning. Her body tensed as she felt the air around them grow colder, heavier. This was not the same Mark she had once loved. This was someone else, someone desperate, vengeful, and unstable. Mark looked up at her, his smile still frozen on his face, but his eyes now gleaming with something darker. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to leave, to run as fast as she could. But she didn't move. She stayed frozen, trapped in that moment of realization. The danger wasn't just in his words. It was in his eyes, in the coldness of his demeanor, in the way he seemed to have no remorse for the twisted message he was sending. For a long moment, Sarah didn't know what to say. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Mark had never been this clear in his intentions. He had always played the role of the charming, remorseful ex, but now it was as if a mask had slipped away, revealing something far more sinister. "I think you should go," Sarah managed to say, her voice shaky but firm. "I can't do this anymore." Mark didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply looked at her with a strange, unreadable expression. Then, without another word, he stood up and walked out of the diner, leaving Sarah sitting there, her heart pounding in her chest. The message was clear now. There would be no closure. There would be no moving on. This was just the beginning. The hours that followed Mark's departure felt like a blur to Sarah. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more frantic and unsettling than the last. She couldn't shake the image of the necklace, the cold, precise message engraved on the back. "This is your final chance." What did it mean? Was he serious? Was it a threat, or had she misinterpreted it? No matter how she turned it over in her mind, Sarah couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that Mark had crossed a line, and whatever it wasn't something she could ignore. She drove home in a daze, her hands trembling on the steering wheel, her thoughts dark and chaotic. Lily had stayed at a friend's house for the evening, and Sarah was relieved. She didn't want to face her daughter just yet, not when she felt so raw, so unsure of what had just happened. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out what she was supposed to do next. When she arrived at their apartment, the familiar, quiet surroundings did nothing to calm her nerves. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant whir of the air conditioner only seemed to highlight the emptiness of the place. Sarah locked the door behind her and sank into the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's face, that cold smile, and the gleam in his eyes. It wasn't just a breakup anymore. It wasn't about love or reconciliation. This was about control, about his twisted need to possess and dominate. Sarah's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her spiral of thoughts. It was a message from Mark. I just wanted to say goodbye. Her stomach dropped, and for a moment, she hesitated before opening it. She was afraid of what it might say, but curiosity won out. You and Lily will be better off without me, but you'll never be free of me. The message hit her like a punch to the gut. Sarah felt a wave of cold dread wash over her. The finality, in his words, wasn't just metaphorical. It felt like a promise, like he was sealing their fates. A lump formed in her throat, and her hands trembled as she typed a reply. Leave us alone, Mark. This is over. Stay away. She hit send, but deep down, she knew that it wouldn't be that simple. Mark had never been one to take no for an answer. Her phone rang seconds later. The number was blocked, but she knew without a doubt who it was. Mark. She let the call go to voicemail. She didn't need to hear it. She didn't need to listen to any more of his manipulative words. But her finger hovered over the screen, and against her better judgment, she opened the voicemail. I'll always be watching. Mark's voice crackled through the speaker. You can't run from me. You'll never escape. The hairs on Sarah's neck stood on end. She slammed the phone down on the couch, her heart racing. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit here and wait for him to make his next move. A few hours later, as the night grew darker and the quiet of the apartment began to feel suffocating, Sarah decided to take action. She couldn't wait for things to escalate further. She needed to protect herself and Lily. She called her friend, Mia, who had been there for her through thick and thin. Mia listened intently, her voice full of concern as Sarah explained what had happened that evening. Sarah, you need to be careful. This doesn't sound like Mark anymore. This sounds dangerous. Mia was right. Sarah had known Mark for so long, but tonight had shown her something new. This wasn't the same man who once promised to love her forever. This was someone different, someone who wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. And right now, it seemed like what he wanted was revenge. After hanging up with Mia, Sarah called the police. She explained everything, the breakups, the threats, the strange messages. She didn't know if they would be able to do much, but at least it would create a record. She was starting to feel cornered, and the walls were closing in. The officers reassured her that they would patrol the area and keep an eye on things. But Sarah knew the truth. No one could protect her from Mark like she could protect herself. Satya, hardest part was still to come. She would have to tell Lily. The innocent joy she had seen in her daughter's face earlier that day felt like a distant memory. How could Sarah explain what was happening without terrifying her? How could she shield her little girl from the truth without losing the last bit of normalcy they had? But for now, all Sarah could do was wait. Wait for the inevitable confrontation. Wait for Mark to make his next move. She was terrified, but one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, she would do whatever it took to protect her daughter, to protect herself. She wouldn't let Mark win. Not again. Not ever. The following day felt like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Sarah couldn't shake the images from the night before, the voicemail, the cold finality of Mark's words. Each time she tried to focus on something normal, her thoughts would spiral back to him, to his increasingly erratic behavior. She had barely slept, the fear gnawing at her every waking moment. The worst part was the uncertainty. She didn't know what Mark was capable of anymore, or how far he was willing to go. Lily was still at her friend's house, and Sarah couldn't bring herself to pick her up. The idea of bringing her back into the storm, knowing that Mark was out there watching, was terrifying. She needed to make sure Lily was safe before anything else. The morning had passed without incident, but as noon approached, Sarah's phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a voicemail. It was Mark, calling directly. Her stomach lurched. She let it ring, but the anxiety that came with each buzz of the phone was unbearable. This wasn't just a normal ex who couldn't accept her. Breakup. This was someone who was stalking her, waiting for the right moment to strike. The more she thought about it, the more she realized Mark wasn't just obsessed. He was unhinged, and his threats were no longer vague. They felt real. After a while, she decided to drive to Mia's house for some support. Mia was the only person who truly understood what Sarah was going through, and being alone with her thoughts had started to feel suffocating. Mia greeted her with concern as soon as she opened the door. Sarah didn't even have to explain. Her face said everything. "What happened, Sarah? I can see it in your eyes. What did Mark do now?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She explained everything, how the meeting had turned ominous, how Mark had sent the cryptic message, and how she'd felt the eerie shift in him. Mia listened quietly, her expression hardening with every word. "We have to do something," Mia said once Sarah had finished. "This isn't just a broken heart anymore. He's dangerous." "I know," Sarah whispered, fighting the tears that threatened to rise. "But I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm just waiting for the worst to happen, and every time my phone rings, I don't know if it's him." Mia's face softened with sympathy. "We can't just wait." "Have you thought about calling the police again?" "I did," Sarah replied. "But I don't know if they can do anything. He's not physically threatening me yet. It's just these messages, the stalking. I'm scared, Mia. I'm really scared." Mia thought for a moment, then looked at Sarah with determination. "We need to be proactive. We'll make sure Lily is safe, and we'll figure out a plan. I'm not letting you go through this alone." As the afternoon passed, Sarah felt a slight shift, a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in this after all. Mia helped her organize a plan. They would take extra precautions with Lily, keep the apartment well lit, and ensure that both of them were always aware of their surroundings. Sarah would change her phone number, get a new security system for the apartment, and most importantly, avoid being alone in the apartment at night if she could help it. But even as they talked through the options, the growing sense of dread was impossible to ignore. When Sarah finally returned home that evening, she found herself scanning every shadow, every corner, her heart pounding in her chest. She kept thinking she saw movement out of the corner of her eye, every flicker of light feeling like a warning. She picked Lily up from her friend's house, keeping up a facade of calm, but the unease inside her was growing unbearable. Lily, unaware of the full extent of the danger, happily chatted about her day as they drove home. Sarah listened absently, trying her best to hide the fear on her face. She couldn't let Lily see how scared she truly was. She couldn't let her sense that something was wrong. When they reached the apartment, Sarah had a sinking feeling in her stomach. It wasn't the same place it used to be. The place that had once felt like a refuge, a new start, now felt like a trap. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from Mark. "You're not safe, Sarah. I'll be waiting." The words hit her like a punch. She turned to look at Lily, who was already halfway up the stairs, oblivious to the message, to the danger that was slowly closing in on them. The terror of it all was suffocating. She needed to act fast. She needed to protect her daughter. Sarah stepped into the apartment, her eyes scanning the rooms. Everything seemed normal, but the fear wouldn't leave her. She quickly locked the door behind her and called Mia again. "It's happening, Mia. I don't know what to do." But Mia wasn't the only one Sarah needed to talk to now. The truth of the situation was clear. Mark had crossed a line, and the police needed to be involved again. Sarah dialed 911. When the officers arrived, Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. They were taking the situation seriously now, but Mark wasn't the kind of person who would just back off. As the officers asked her more questions, Sarah realized how far the danger had escalated. This wasn't just a few missed calls or a broken relationship anymore. This was a threat to her life, to Lily's life. And she didn't know when or where Mark would strike next. But she knew this. He wasn't going to stop until he had control over everything. As the officers left, promising to patrol the area more regularly, Sarah hugged Lily tightly. The small comfort of holding her daughter close was the only thing keeping her grounded. But deep down, Sarah knew it wasn't enough. The threat was real, and it was only a matter of time before it all came to a head. She would fight for her daughter's safety. Whatever it took, she would protect her.